Hi, welcome to Digging for Truth. I'm your host, Henry Smith. Returning for part 2 of our episode on his book, Scribes and Scripture, is Dr. John Meade from Phoenix Seminary.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Henry.
All right, my friend. Well, we were talking about, in part 1, we were sort of explaining a text found at the Dead Sea.
So this is a text of the Ten Commandments mainly, but some scribe thought, let's use Deuteronomy 8, 5-10 as an introduction to this. This scroll also shows another free scribal tendency, right? And these texts are probably created for different reasons. When you get to the Sabbath day commandment, the reason why they're going to keep the Sabbath is because God's going to bring them into the land. But in Exodus 20, there is a whole different reason for keeping it is given. And we're told to keep the Sabbath there because God worked for 6 days in creation, but rested on the seventh day. Now, that might not have set well with a particular Jewish scribe. Exodus 20, verse 11 is added to the Deuteronomy 5 text. The whole verse is simply added. So it's actually it's marked off as an intentional addition to the text. It was intended to be used for liturgy or commentary.
And it doesn't mean that the text was in this wild state of fluctuation and that we can't know what the original text was and all those kind of assumptions. I want to move to Old Testament canon. We'll move out of text. Let's move to canon.
Canon is authority. If it means anything, it's authority. So what we're getting at are what books were divinely inspired, what books were recognized as divine authority in the life of the Jewish synagogue and in the life of the Christian church. One area of evidence are the canon lists. So these are actually lists from early Jews, early Christians. The other form of evidence is ancient manuscripts. Manuscripts can't reflect a canon. They reflect maybe reading habits, okay? Books that are important to a certain community. The famous Codex Sinaiticus contains the complete 27-book New Testament canon. This is from the 4th century. But what most people don't know is that Codex Sinaiticus also contains the Epistle of Barnabas and the Shepherd of Hermas after our book of Revelation. Now we got to ask, are those two books in the canon because they're in a manuscript? And my answer to that is no, because when you start to compare and contrast these different evidences, no father of the church ever lists the Shepherd of Hermas as a canonical book. Scripture quotations. Right, in the New Testament, we see all these citations and quotations of books of the Old Testament. So those 4 pieces of evidence are super important for how we reconstruct the history of the canon. Canon lists are the clearest of that evidence. The Jewish historian Josephus talks about how the Jews have only ever had 22 books that are divinely inspired. So by 100 AD, the canon is closed.
Let's talk a little bit about New Testament canon.
When you're talking about canon, for whatever reason, it becomes the topic of conspiracy. Where this idea came from is actually from Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. If the audience has read the book or seen the film, then you know that there's this scene, Teabing, I think, he talks about how there were 80-something gospels that were in the Bible, but that a later council, like at Nicaea in 325 AD, removed from the Bible and left us with only 4 gospels. Now, this is the narrative that is out there. Henry, it is in the air. We could talk about the evangelical pastor Andy Stanley. He's made some controversial statements over the years about the Bible, that the Bible wasn't created until the 4th century, and it was created as a process of selection. Like there was a bunch of eligible books, and Christian leaders just picked and chose which ones they wanted and left the rest. Okay, that's wrong. Okay, we have a canon because of apostolic tradition. One of the criteria is that a book that wound up in the canon, the New Testament canon, must have been written by an apostle or a close associate. It does seem that we have a closed 4-gospel collection by at latest 180 AD. To say that there were all these gospels vying for that position is really a misnomer, and we need to squelch that idea. Yes, there were lots of other gospels, but the debate is about, did anyone seriously think that they were going to be in the universal canon for the church. If you have questions about these other gospels, go read them. There's some talking crosses involved in some of these the Gospel of Peter, you know. I mean,
Very
there's
strange.
some really
Yes.
interesting and strange things. The vast majority of Christians never thought about them as authoritative or canonical.
Yes. John, thank you so much for this great work. I really enjoyed the book. I appreciate all your scholarship, and give my thanks to Dr. Gurry as well.